All right, very good. So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here for another one of our webinars to discuss human synergistics and how we collaborate with our wonderful network of accredited practitioners. So today I'm very happy to welcome to the session Bernhard Zimmermann and Philip Botha of Searchlight, both executive coaches and consultants, here to share with us their insights on indispensable listening and interpersonal skills for developing and facilitating effective virtual team collaboration. So very excited to hear your insights. We've been working together for quite some time. We consistently get wonderful feedback and hear great things about how you support clients. So very interested to see your insights today, and thank you for taking part in sharing.
Thank you very much, John.
Yeah.
So let me kick off. I think all of us were a bit shocked when COVID hit, and where overnight the whole way of working changed. And the question that we ask ourselves today is probably, well, you know, who cares about virtual, because we all work in virtual. But even 2 years after we started really working with virtual, we still feel that we are underestimating the issues and the problems that we have when we have to deal with virtual. But just to backtrack very quickly, both Bernhard and I already started working a lot in virtual already 2013, 2014. And wow. As with many other people in our business pretty much dried up the minute that COVID hit. So we needed to, try and find different ways of working, but we also needed to do something, because here is probably the biggest challenge that we faced in 30, 40 years, and we needed to learn from it. So we came up with the idea that we wanted to do a podcast. And the whole podcast was about leadership development, but in a virtual surrounding, because what we do is leadership development. And initially it was just going to be a few sessions, but funnily enough, it just expanded and expanded and expanded. We really got very, very deep into it. And as things grew, and now I think we have about 30 episodes, we kept coming back to the magic starts with connection. And we finally realized that that is actually our insight of everything that we've done, that connection, and that is not connection on the it level. It's not the physical connection that we're talking about. We all talk about connectivity, but the real connection is the connection between people on the interpersonal level. Mm-hmm. And that is not that easy, because even in real life, it is very difficult. And one of the main reasons why it is so difficult in virtual is, we'll come to that. But the thing is that even though virtual has all the problems and challenges, it can be incredibly powerful. It's not the same as face-to-face. It will always be different. But the thing is, how can we make that powerful? And we believe that if we can build connection, that is how we can make that powerful. But the essential issues that we face in virtual really boil down to us as people. Bernhard.
Yeah. So before we dive into how it actually all works and what we found out is, let's just look in what is the reality a lot of people face. And people think I'm not connected. I'm disconnected. I break the link between them. And when we talk with people how they feel on either side, they said, you know, really, I feel alone. I'm at home, I'm a home office, I'm somewhere in a place, and I still feel alone. And that's the reality of virtual. Now, if you compare that to what happened in the times before, when we were in the room, people felt the space filled with people because they were physically present. Now, all of a sudden, they're faced with a flat screen at home, and nobody's around them. So that makes this loneliness, and at the same time, it disconnects each of them, at least that's our experience with speaking with people, from some of the social contracts we have when we interact and how we behave with each other. And I don't know whether you've heard that from some of the studies they did. They call this effect the amplification. And the amplification, unfortunately, works only on the negative behavior patterns. So if you lose that connection with the social contract, how we behave in the room, then the amplification drives up some of the negative behavior because we feel lonely, there's nobody around, we speak whenever we think need to speak, and we interact in very different ways. And nobody is kind of watching us from the side, whether or not we stay focused on what's happening or not. And that is the real challenge then.
And this is something you're finding is ongoing with your clients. I mean, I hear some feedback asking, you know, haven't we acclimated to this by now? Aren't we sort of conditioned to this way of working online?
Yes and no. Sorry, Philip, go on.
No, please go.
I said yes and no. You find that people have acclimated, but you still, and that I think for some people, they have not acclimated because they have not consciously reflected on their behavior. And in some cases, it's when they're stressed out, when they're under pressure. And I don't know whether you've heard people, some of the clients I'm working with, they said, no, ever since COVID hit, I have not just single bookings in my calendar, I have triple bookings, and I don't know where to go first and when to do my emails because I work from 8 to 8 on meetings, and then I should do in parallel my emails, which drives also this pressure on multitasking, which again is kind of breaking the social contract.
John, just to add to that, we, as you probably know, just going back to what you guys do as human synergistics, we've been used to face-to-face contact for hundreds of thousands of years, and still we don't do it perfectly. That's why we still have fight or flight, and we react to that. And just picking up from what Bernhard says, these behaviors are amplified when we are in virtual, which is why we suffer from it. And until we actually start looking at it in a different way and behaving in it and literally amplifying our behavior, we will not be able to connect.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you.
So the thing that we realized is that as human beings, where we are in a virtual situation, we are physically separated, but the behavior that we have also separates us mentally even more. And the thing that we crave, that we need, is literally, we need to be one. And to be able to be one, that's where we need that connection. And from our own practice, from our own learning by making mistakes, we realize that literally the magic starts with connection. Until you start that connection, it's not going to be optimal, but rather suboptimal. So how do we build that connection? Because it's not that easy, and the different cultures are different. We live in Germany, where building that interpersonal connection is maybe a little bit more challenging than it is, let's say, in Spain, where people are more outgoing and more open. But what we found from working in the podcast, if we don't consciously build awareness and curiosity, it becomes very difficult. Now, going back to amplification, awareness and curiosity online is much more difficult than it is in face-to-face. Learning how to ask questions. Well, we don't do that very well offline, which means that the way that we do it offline is even worse. And then what was our insight is the way we listen offline is already pretty, let's say, can be much better. But we realized that to really move to build connection, we need to listen in a new way. Now, both of us are coaches, and we've come across many different listening techniques, but we found that none of these listening techniques or listening models really cut it for us. so we realized that we needed to come up with a different way of looking at it. And we came up with, developed that, and that's what we want to talk about today. So, you know, when we start listening, we normally just listen to the first 3 seconds that somebody says. And then we start listening to what we think they say. And then we start reacting and behaving according to what we think we heard, not to what we actually heard. So it all ends up in something that's less optimal if we look at our behavior. So what is our new way of listening, Bernhard?
Yeah. So, and just let me connect to that. I had a conversation yesterday of a senior executive who actually struggles with listening, because every time he listens to the other people, said, "I got it." And by thinking I got it, he actually makes up the story rather than listening what people say, even says it before they finish the sentence. So, but the 4 channels of the listening, what we did determined, the one is listening just to the content, you know, what's actually being said and what you can hear. The second one is, we know that, I think most of us, is hearing between the lines, also going for body language. And then the third one, that becomes then interesting, is that conversation interruptions. That happens much more severe and direct in a virtual interaction. And then because we're on our own, the mind chatter is much more activated than some people may admit even. And then they're listening to the intuition and the meta-level interruption that happens outside the direct interaction. And we see it not as you choose one channel, but you're actually in all 4 channels. And depending what happens with all of us and when you facilitate an interaction, it's like a mixing desk. You know, when you're in the sound studio, when you facilitate a meeting, you're in the sound studio, you need to be able to play with the 4 channels yourself as a facilitator, but at the same time, be aware how the participants are actually using the 4 channels. And I think we have a great example. Philip wants to play his favorite video of how interactions can go the worst ever see. But it's Philip, I'm looking forward to see that and see what the others think of the interesting virtual meeting. But
I probably you've all seen it, but I'm already smiling because when I saw this, I was literally, you know, can it get worse? And I think we've all seen our different, all the different worst things that can happen in a Zoom call. We've seen that, but this is, for me, you know, something that we can really learn from. And there was a parish meeting that happened, and I've just taken a minute, but the meeting actually carried on for a lot longer. So
we'll start the meeting, and I want to repeat what I said at the beginning of the last meeting, that this meeting has not been called according to the law. The law has been broken.
It has been properly
Will you
called.
please let the chairman
Mrs. Weaver, please.
If you disrupt this meeting, I will have to remove you from it.
You can't.
It's only the chairman who can remove people from a meeting. You have no authority here, Jackie Weaver. No authority at all.
She's just kicked him out.
I-
No, she's kicked him out. Don't. She's kicked him out. Don't.
This is a meeting called by 2 councillors.
Illegally?
They now elect a chairman.
No, they can't, because the vice chair's here. I take charge. Read the standing orders. Read them and understand them. Stop it.
So even from that little bit, I think it's obvious that they have a problem. And even from just this 1 minute, there is so much that we can talk about what went wrong. And it's a lot easier to look at what went wrong, to say, well, you know, it helps if we could do this, or it helps if we could do that. But what we want to run through is just using this as an example to very briefly give you an idea of how can we use the different channels of listening to actually improve what we do online? And so, Bernhard.
Yeah. So channel one is really, to actually listen what has been said and hear that. Now, just I don't want to dwell too much on the video, but when you think about Jackie Weaver and the interaction with the chair, is very clear. Nobody is actually listening to the other person. Nobody hears what's being said. And that's obviously because there's something going on politically behind the scene, which you may actually then elevate to another level of the channel. We come to that later. But actually just on the way they interact and talk over each other and not listening to each other, you think that's funny and that does not happen. And I can guarantee you when you're in, well, you may have the same experience. People, when we go in, so let's put some rules, ground rules in, and people get bored by it. And then I said, I promise you, when the debate gets heated, you will actually face the situation that you talk into each other because you all of a sudden not willing to hear to each other. So, and as facilitators, really, and that's the key point here, at the level of channel one, we have to provide and maintain a space where people feel they have the right for equal contribution. They have the space that to speak, to express, and to be heard. And to being heard means that either we as facilitators have to summarize, bring them back and say, okay, so this is what I've heard. What do the other think? We need to create the space and manage the space in a way that the actual hearing the content happens, and that different challenges we could talk about, but this is the key element when we facilitate that. And if you speak to Philip can give you a separate webinar of rules of engagement. That's the foundation you actually lay to make channel one work at the first level.
You want a question, John?
Yeah, and channel one is primarily with regard to conscious listening. Is that right? I mean, the first step is really to listen, be aware of what the other people are saying, right? Be open to their input, non-judgmental. That's really the first step you're saying in this process. Is that right?
Absolutely. And if you listen to, or if you watch the video again, they don't even start on the first base. Right. You know, and we'll come to that. They're listening to themselves. And if you continue, the attitude behind that is it's more important to be right than actually to be effective in running the meeting. Right. You know, if you using the circumplex and the behavior styles, yes, you can see a lot of red. So yes, behavior and listening are connected.
Yes, this is associated with one of my favorite questions from the group styles inventory, something along the lines of the group members are trying to win their points rather than solve the problem. Right?
Yeah. You know, and if you go into behavior and listening, one has the impression that Jackie is only listening for what she wants to hear so that she can kick the chairman out.
Right. Yeah. Very good.
But if we go to channel two, which is, you know, when we start listening what is said between the lines, now it really becomes interesting. You know, as I said, what actually are the motives behind what the people are doing and what they want to do? Because there are vastly different opinions. And you can hear the frustration, you can hear the anger. But because people are not even listening at level one, they're definitely not listening at level two. And if the chairman is leading the meeting, well, actually, Jackie is leading the meeting. But effectively, no one is leading the meeting. So what we are saying is that if you want to facilitate virtual communication, you really need to actively create that space. and be able to step up and I mean, there were so many spaces where one could have stopped and said, hold on, what is the frustration? I hear you talking about this. I hear you talking about this. Let's take a few steps back and actually stop, listen, and find out what it is. Why are we here? Because just the frustration, the anger that we can read between the lines, you know, and then if you continue going on into body language, and this is another thing, for instance, that you have online. Do you remember you could only see one person's chin? That's body language. So if we don't make sure that people can actually see us properly framed in the screen, other people can't hear us, they can't see us properly. And we listen to body language as much as we look at body language. So if you hear the voice, but the face is distorted, whether it's in shadows, etc., that's part of listening.
Yeah. And there's one key element. Sorry, there's one key element. No, before I jump in, sorry, other questions.
Okay, just wanted to add, yes, how important it is to have switched on the camera on such meetings, and obviously be visible, not like I am now. But those two guys on video, yes, they were visible only like a piece of face, yes, which is also very, very bad, yes, because you can't see the face, the eyes, the face expressions. So listening on this channel too is very much difficult in that case.
Absolutely. So for us, you know, we're in face-to-face listening on level 1 would just be literally just listening. But if your camera is off, if you're on mute, you're not listening, you can't listen. But that's a choice, that's a specific behavioral choice, even though it is subconscious.
There's one key element as well, what I hear when I speak with people said, but you know, you don't tell me that body language works virtual. And I said, it does. Well, I don't know who read Paul Ekman on his micromimics. Now you can, Paul Ekman and a few other people say, whatever happens in body language happens in the face. The face is an expression of the whole body. You just need to train yourself to recognize what's happening, what's the tension, what's happening. And there are different techniques. How do you actually read then the body language of individuals or even the group and the room when you have 24 panels of videos in front of you? That's and what I found also interesting in the video, sorry, Phil, to come in, even when people only show up with the chin below, there is something happening with them. Do they actually really want to be there, or actually ignoring that? They're blending it out and blocking that channel, like switching off the camera, almost.
It sends a message, absolutely.
You know, so if we want to facilitate this, remember we talked about amplification. Let's say if I'm the team leader, it's my job to make sure that people show up lit properly, so that others can see them properly, because it makes it a lot easier for everyone else. But, you know, body language in a room, it's a lot easier than, let's say, on screen. But you have to be able to scan through everything and to pick it up. So it's a different take on body language than we normally do. Much more stressful. But if you get beyond that, you're able to bring it in and start bringing people together. Because the biggest issue that we have is we feel alone. And where we want to be is if we're connected, you actually have that sense of connection, that everybody is in the same space. And then people start behaving and reacting and connecting in a normal way. Now, if we move to the third one, which is
conversation interruptions and mind chatter. So just coming back quickly to that video, that was obvious in the way Jackie Weaver reacted. I mean, I think she was very happy, even gleeful, that the chair reacted the way it reacted, because she had, apparently she had an agenda. You could think the mind chatter, if you guess what the mind chatter of Jackie Weaver was, she had a clear agenda and said, I'm going to make him explode, whatever. I'm going to kick him out. So I'm going to take over on that one. So, and the interruption patterns, interesting enough, when you think what happened, it continues. And that's what we see in virtual meetings. If something of interruption of conversation happens and you as a facilitator are not consciously aware and intervene, that will replicate itself because the culture builds up very quickly. And then people start interrupting rather than paying attention, leaving the space and then coming back in and kind of play with even latencies, whatever. That's not the issue. If the awareness of the people is there, how do you actually take care of not interrupting people? And that's, again, that you keep the awareness. As a facilitator, you have to maintain the awareness for each other, what's happening, who wants to contribute, and how do you actually deal then if interruptions can happen, okay? But then do you have a process in place? Do you have a facilitation style in place that deals with the interruptions to stop the continuation of interruptions as a mode of operandi?
Yeah, and get the team back on track. So what exactly do you mean by mind chatter? Is this sort of the internal dialogue that goes on in our mind as we're listening to other people? Okay, very good. So this is the whole, what percentage of the time when you're listening, are you actually listening, or are you thinking of and coming up with your response to that? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, John, is that if you look at the video, they take the mind chatter and that is what they actually express, which means they're not listening. Now, the difficult thing is that mind chatter can actually be a great source of asking questions, becoming curious. Mm-hmm. So instead of saying, well, you are wrong, you use the idea or the subject matter and ask a question about that, which means there is still a link to what happens in the mind chatter, but you just start using it in a very creative, curious way. Now that starts enriching the conversation for everyone.
Yeah. And if you think, I don't know whether when you look into people's face and you see a particular reaction, at least that's the way I go for it. I actually I dive into that person, said, I've noticed something happening. What's going through your mind? Could bring the mind chatter in the open if there's something relevant. That's why I think and just one technique, Philip, we haven't talked about that, but is you all probably know you can actually pin videos. Even if you have 24 panels, you can pin one person and see them enlarged. Just as a facilitator to see what's actually happening there. If you have the intuitive reaction, something is happening, and then said, I want to explore, maybe there's something important in the mind chatter going on in that person.
But it's really important, if you're leading the conversation, you need to role model these things, because if you do that, people will start responding and mirroring your own behavior. And if people hear you say, John, I just saw you smile, what's happening there? Because you could see there was something happening going on.
Right.
People hear that and they will start looking for that. And it is this amplification of behavior. I tell you, I see you smiling.
Yeah.
So that it is really obvious. We really need to be that obvious so that people know. And slowly over time, we start assimilating that into our behavior, which means that over time, we will become better at that.
Yeah, it really is a skill to develop in terms of how we communicate in these ways. Fantastic. So not to back up, but we're talking about channels, and I sort of had a couple of questions building here. One is, what specifically do you mean by a channel? And the second, and maybe if I can give that to you now, is, do we have to do these in order? Is this really starting with, listening must come first, and then we're building upon that, the additional channels in the group?
The reason why we talk about channels, initially we started talking about levels. But if you think about that mentally, you think that you move from one level to the next. So yes, logically, you have to start with listening for the content. But what we realized is it's much more difficult. You have to do all four at the same time. So the metaphor that we came up with is literally, if you're at a mixing desk let's say a 16-channel mixing desk when we were still in the physical world, where you are moving these levers all at the same time. At the same time as listening to the content, you also have to be listening to the interruptions, listening to your mind chatter, and bring that back into the conversation.
Right.
It all has to happen at the same time, which means that listening is much more complex and difficult. You know, and the strongest muscle of listening is asking questions.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I think most teams really get off on that first step of listening, right? And it is more difficult in these kinds of virtual settings. And once we take those steps, then it makes it very hard to follow up with the additional channels and, again, you know, manage our own mind chatter and yeah, be open to the other ideas.
When we come to the fourth one, which is meta-level interruptions and intuition. Now, what do we mean with meta-level? Meta-level interruptions are interruptions that have absolutely nothing to do with the conversation. You could lose the connection, which has nothing to do with the conversation, but that interrupts the conversation. You know, where Jackie throws him out, you could say that's a meta-level interruption. Now, here is something that is fundamental in the conversation. But if one person didn't say she threw him out, you wouldn't know about that. And that is probably the most important thing about actually what the real problem is behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Many things can happen. You know, you could just see the tail of a cat in a screen, and that could lead to an interesting thought, or you could hear a bell in the background. Many things can happen, but we look at all of these meta-level interruptions, but from a curious point of view. How does that inform us from a different perspective about what's happening and what we are hearing? And then in addition to that, the intuition. You know, my intuition just jumps around like a mad thing when I watch that video, because there are just so many things that are happening. But again, intuition is just something to get curious about, because we have to amplify our curiosity when we are in virtual.
Mm.
So it's how we express it and how we bring it in a curious way that creates it. But we have to create the space for it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to facilitate it. Otherwise, we will not see the behavior from the people that take part in our sessions.
Interesting. Yes, I can certainly sympathize with these meta-level interruptions. I think, you know, we just did a regional meeting not too long ago, and one of the experiences we were testing out was running teams through problem solving simulations, and we had both face-to-face as well as virtual groups. And despite the best preparation, I think, as we all can sympathize, you know, a few people had trouble logging in and they lost their links, and and so when we really looked at the challenges of the virtual experience versus the face-to-face, you know, it really almost had sort of two levels to that. There's the whole complexity around what we're talking about, the listening, the mind chatter, the social interaction through that kind of medium, a bit compounded by the fact that there's another level of possible distractions associated with just the technology running smoothly itself. Yeah.
Don't you think it's very much around this humanistic style in our circumplex? Because this is very much about your interest in another person, yes? Your real curiosity to know, to understand the other person. Because this is like going down really to this interest in another person. Yes, in their what they say, what they want, what they feel, etc.
Yeah, what you say is very right. You have to go and find that interest, and it's using everything that happens as a way of becoming more interested.
And it could well play. It could well play the meta-level interruptions play in that area that indirect expression that actually, no, I don't give a toss about this meeting, but I have to be there. And then I've lost the link, or actually now my internet is breaking now, whatever. That's something that, well, at least from my experience, it interplays with that. When you see, okay, where is that person in the long run with that team or in participating in that series of workshops?
Exactly.
So Bernhard has an interesting story, just to demonstrate this level. And Bernhard, take this.
So now I'm focusing on the intuition, just that I talked a bit about before with saying, now, how do you actually get know the body language and then use that? And when you have 24 panels, when you have a lot of participants in your room, or even 30, I do occasionally workshops up to 60 people, which is quite at the edge of doing anything. But 30 panels, do you actually still get what's happening? And it takes time to get used to that. And there was one workshop where 30 people were there, 4 were extremely active. They were very keen on contributing and always saying, raising the hand, and we had rules in place that they raised the hand before they speak. So always fine. But some people would stay quiet. And there was one person, I just thought, okay, I asked that person, I hadn't heard from that person. And that person was very cautious, but gave a very, very brief answer. And I felt that something was going on when she responded, and actually pinned her video on this main screen and looked what was happening in the face as it progressed. And I said, so what else is happening for you? What's there for you? And all of a sudden, the person felt, oh, hang on a minute, I have the space to speak. It's not the 4 dominating, but this is my time to speak. And it was a very good, that's judgmental, a very elaborate answer. She had obviously thought quite for some time to contribute that. And for me, the nice thing at the end was we did the checkout, what's the main insight you're getting? And out of the 30 people, I think 2/3 said, what she contributed to that part in the discussion was wonderful. That was a great summary of what we talked around. And I thought, so, and that's, go with the intuition, what's happening. And sometimes I cannot even say, is it top right-hand corner or the one below? But I notice in the periphery, something is happening. And I just draw the attention, because then my gut says, watch out, there's something going on there. And that takes time. Well, I don't think it takes time to build the intuition. We all have that. It may take time to trust the intuition in the virtual space and not say that may be a technical distortion. No, it's not. It is actually something that a message we should just pick up and take courage to address it.
The intuition is not it's not about being right, that your intuition is right, but it's just using your intuition as a source to become curious and create space for others to step into it. And that's where our conversations can lead to a much more effective space. And I think this case study of Bernhard's just shows that quite dramatically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always been amazed at how often when we look at teams solving problems, how frequently the 1 or 2 people who have the best ideas are often the 1 or 2 people who aren't contributing to the conversation, right? For one reason or the other, they're holding back, they're quiet. Maybe they feel their idea is too different from the others. Maybe they feel that their input isn't welcome, whatever it may be. But for one reason or the other, they're sort of keeping it to themselves. And, so often you look at teams solving problems and working on those sorts of exercises and realizing that, it's not that we didn't have good ideas, it's that we weren't able to find them or hear them from the group. And I think part of it goes back to what Maria mentioned as well in groups and teams. And something that I've always noticed as a challenge in organizations is sort of, when you think of the circumplex, sort of the inherent focus and almost preference in many organizations for an emphasis on task orientation. It's about getting things done. It's about solving this problem. It's about doing it on time. It's about, and then we underestimate or underemphasize the importance of the interpersonal things, making sure we hear from everyone, making sure people understand what the situation, what the problem is, how they can contribute, It's really those two things together that enables us to do our best. But more and more, I agree with you completely. With virtual teams, we've got to use every channel that we can to encourage that kind of participation and make sure that we're listening to it and hearing it when it comes through.
So when we go back to doing the podcast, and we had developed our model of listening, and we realized that there was actually another human synergistics tool that supported this. And so it's using a human synergistics tool in a completely different context, because at the time, both Bernhard and I were working with survival simulations.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was interesting when Philip and I sat down and talked through in the podcast episodes, and then it popped up. So, but hang on a minute. Now, what we're talking about, there is a connection to the problem solving model when you look into the interpersonal skills, quite obvious. And then what we thought. So, what's happening there when you actually not in the room, but when you go into the virtual space? But before we go there, just kind of, I think you probably, as far as I understand, Maria and Ella, you practitioners, so you know that. I don't know if you talk through, or John, you probably know it by heart. So the listening, how it's defined as a standard skill, independent of the context, I think mainly defined for the original face-to-face interaction. So the listening, the supporting, differing, and participating. Okay, so these elements as key skills to interact, and what we've just talked about is really what is listening, that the much more in-depth way of listening and interacting to make sure it's an effective interaction. But then we thought, why not also looking into the supporting, participating, and differing way? What's there that may actually be a challenge and then need some different approaches when you facilitate in a virtual context? And that's what we just want to bring in as well, because I thought that was interested the community here.
So what we realized is that if we look at participating, and participating really in a virtual space is enabling everybody to be able to take part, because it is much more difficult to take part. So, and we came up with that you have to create a space, a culture. And once you've created that space, that culture, you also, in the moment, you have to continuously facilitate. So there are these two processes that you have to run as the leader, or as the team leader, or as the coach or facilitator, whatever your role is. But if you are not doing that to ensure that participation happens, it's not going to happen, and connection won't happen. So it's creating the space, the rules of engagement, so that people actually feel that they're in a safe space. Only then can they actually start having the opportunity to collaborate and participate.
Yeah. So you want to show the text as well, or not?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. And the thing is I think clearly when you're in participating, the active, what I already said before in an example, the active participation, invite people, and that the culture needs to be that the space is there given by us as facilitators and by the participants, that people can be activated, and then also go into the area, is it us opposed to me? You see that in the dynamic in some of the teams which are more dysfunctional. It's all about the me and the us, and that in a virtual context is much more a challenge to actually bring the people into the thinking space that it is about us, because they sit on their own in front of the screen, and yet you have to bring them to the point that they say, I'm actually in the virtual room, I'm not just in front of this flat screen.
Yeah.
You know, if we go back to our favorite video, it's very much, it's me, and everybody is fighting for airspace. So it is competitive and it is domineering, which points to that everybody competing for who's controlling and who's throwing out whom, nobody is creating a space where everybody can participate. So participation actually doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's a fascinating process. And I always have liked the model, the problem solving model from HS, because these skills that we need teams to use in order to be effective, the rational skills, which are usually well represented, but it's those interpersonal skills, especially like we're talking about now with virtual settings, that become so challenging, listening, being open to other people's ideas and so on. And those skills are things that people have, but they need to be fostered and encouraged. And that, kind of goes down to the next level of the group's interaction or culture, in terms of, to what extent are members really expected to share their ideas, ask other people from input if we're not hearing from them, encourage and create that participative behavior in the team so that people can use those interpersonal skills, share their good ideas, we can hear them, consider them, and potentially incorporate them into solutions. So it's always interesting to look at that. And so frequently you see groups and organizations thinking that their people don't have the right skills. And more I tend to find that it's not that we don't have the skills, we're just working in a way, or in a group in a way that's preventing us from using those skills, or getting in the way from us being able to leverage them to our best ability.
Mm. So if we move on to the second one, supporting.
Yeah. So now the key thing there in supporting in a virtual context is facilitate how people are able to express themselves in that virtual meeting. Okay, so as facilitators, we need to provide the safe and open space. And the safe and open space means that people really know, okay, so I'm actually here and I'm part of it. They accept it, valued. They don't have to be defensive or being judged or intimidated. When you think about the video we've seen before, in the second half of it, I mean, the aggressive side of the vice chair, you can say, oh my God, if you're not kind of very, very solid grounded, you're kind of blown away just by what comes across the screen. And that's something, it can happen. I mean, if people get really irritated in a meeting and in the virtual meeting, how do you actually maintain then that space, the openness, and people said, I still, okay, I'm protected, I can express myself and contribute and collaborate.
As Bernhard said, the chairman's reaction, which was very toxic, very aggressive, was literally because there was no space. And everything that was important for him was at risk. And touching on from what you said earlier, John, is if we are in charge of a meeting, whether doesn't matter what our role is, this is our responsibility. We have to facilitate the space. We have to facilitate these processes so that we create a space where the behavior can start happening, because it is in virtual, it is just so much more difficult to happen than it is in face-to-face. And then finally, if we go to differing, where, I mean, differing really is, how do we create opportunity from the differing opinions that we had? And I think if we go back to the video, there was just aggressive, different opinions. There was no differing. But here it is really, how can we use the differences that we have to actually become curious about the differences so that we create value for everyone? And to do that, we need that inclusiveness, that everyone is engaged. Exactly the opposite of what was happening in the video. If you have that kind of aggression and defense behaviors that we saw, there is no creative collaboration.
Yeah. And there's also, again, when I compare it here with in room and in virtual, remember what I said at the beginning, the amplification, that the social contract is not in place when you sit in front of the screen. And that could be that the difference are maybe used more as a personal attack. And we as facilitators need to be very clear and very vigilant. So hang on a minute, okay, intervene here, stop it right from the start. That we said, oh yes, of course, we have a contract in place, what Philip said before, that people feel we're in one room, even so virtual, and have this social contract as a basic element in place. And that's the key element, that we can also be very effective in the skill of differing.
Yeah. You know, if you just think back on the video, how many differences came up in that 1 minute that they could explore?
Yeah, certainly enough. Yes, indeed. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, you're saying that it's really a difference in the social contract, if you will, between how we're expected and how we understand we're expected to work together face to face versus virtually. Is that?
Well, it's how
right?
do we get to that social contract?
Yeah.
Because we have to be able to listen in a different way.
Right.
And we have to be able to use our skills, our interpersonal skills, in a much more fundamental way.
Much more proactive, yes.
Yes, but also in an expanded way than just listening, just participating, just creating space for others. As the leader of the room, you have to be conscious of how do you do that physically? What processes are you going to run to be able to make that happen? And in the moment, how are you going to facilitate that to happen? Because it doesn't happen on its own.
No.
So Philip, I have just a practical or maybe technical questions, because I always find it difficult when you have the screen on the screen PowerPoint, then you see participants, only a few participants, and you don't see the rest. Yes. So how you do it, you know, how you make sure that you control somehow the rest of the participants?
The one is you need to work with two screens.
Oh, yes.
And the other is, so that you can have the people as large as possible, is really to train your eyes, because it's not that you can't see it. Our eyes take in a huge amount of information. It's being able to react in a split second to something that's happening that catches your eye and to become curious about it. You can't physically see anything rationally. But if you see something, you know, it's just jumping in and using that to become curious, because that's really using all our senses in listening. I hope that answers your question, Maria.
To some extent, because it's also technical that you have to switch off the screen, yes, to really see the whole group of participants. So that's what is quite difficult technically, yes, when you have PowerPoint presentation.
Absolutely, Maria, which is why you need to have two.
Yes,
that's why you're right, that you need to have two, really.
So, and the way I do it, you can actually also go and contact International on our blog. I wrote it, I think, in 2020, beginning of 2020, how to facilitate a meeting effectively. I have my laptop, a smaller screen, only 13-inch screen in front of me. And I just look down, because at the end of the day, I know my presentation. I know what I'm going to talk about.
Exactly.
And I have the large screen, 24 inches is mine only. That's where I see the participants. So maximize the field of vision where you see the participants, minimize what you talk about anyway, because you know this stuff, but you just need to be there. Okay, what do they actually see? You know, you can't run blindly on that one, but then really that's how I switch. And sometimes I wish, you know, when you have 30 participants, I thought maybe it should be a 30-inch screen or whatever. But still, what Philip says as well, it's the intuition that not everything happens consciously in seeing people, but you need to be on that borderline of what happens there. What's the inkling you have? There's something going on. What is it?
I think what you just...
Yes.
Sorry. I think what you just said is a great example. Sorry. You know, most of the time when we're giving these kinds of discussions virtually, we're focused on our content. You know, we've got the full screen as our PowerPoint, what we're communicating, and the secondary information is all the little images of the people who are taking part. And I really love your idea, Bernhard, about, you know, switching that around. And if we know our content, then that should be the secondary focus. The primary focus should be the people that we're communicating with. And I can relate to it. Just did an accreditation yesterday and was talking through something I've talked through 100 times, but specifically noticed somebody, you could sort of see the light bulb go on when they, that connects with something, and then you're able to respond to that and follow up. And that's how we pull people into these conversations. And it's a great example. I love that idea of sort of flipping the content from the telling to the listening.
And just give you, if you think when you've done trainings in the room, okay, would you ever stand with a back to the participants, look at your slides, and talk through them? No, never. They're in the back of you, and you speak to them. That's
great example.
It is a very good example. Absolutely.
But John, just to go back to the example that you had, is that in that moment that you react to something that happens, again, going back to amplification, you are amplifying the behavior, which means you are amplifying that person's sense of feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling taken care of.
Yeah.
Now, that interpersonal, that's where the connection starts.
Trying to reach through the screen and make that connection. Absolutely.
And we have to be very amplified in what we do for that to happen. So where we started the webinar originally, we realized that we had to have a fourth element in how do we actually build connection. And that is also using those interpersonal skills, but in a much broader, much more fundamental way.
Fantastic. And it is what we see. I know HS has been looking into this, and I've seen it myself. If we just look on average, sort of randomly across virtual teams, they're still able to do a lot of those task-oriented behaviors, recognize what the goal is and what the problem we're trying to solve is and why we're here today and what the agenda is. Where we start to struggle is, again, with those interpersonal behaviors of how do we connect with each other, really listen, help people feel included and heard. Those are the pieces that we have to really put conscious effort into augmenting for our performance.
So that's it from us. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for sharing it. It's fantastic insights. I always love these insights that come from lots of experience, and yours certainly do. So thank you for sharing those with us and your stories and concepts. Happy that we can help. It's always a pleasure to work with you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for the work you do.